Welcome. Hey, how's everybody doing? This is our Sunday live stream. How is everybody? Um, we're going to get into this thing about Rambo. Last week I said we were going to talk about Rambo. This week we will be talking about Rambo, the Sylvester Stallone amazing movie. Well, we're going to talk about Rambo's 1 and 2 this week, to be quite honest. These are sort of the most relevant Rambo movies. Um, So we're going to talk about 1 and 2, that being First Blood and First Blood 2. We're going to talk about not just those movies, but we're also going to talk about the um, the author who was not a fan of the first movie, the author of the book. AJ3 jumps on it immediately. That Sylvester Stallone changed the ending of the Rambo book. And I'm going to discuss that. I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about the characters and motivations of Rambo. Um, I haven't seen the other Rambo movies recently, even though I have seen pretty much all of them at different times. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to go through some interviews of Sylvester Stallone talking about the changing in movie industry. And now that he's 75 years old, things has changed quite a bit. We're going to talk about Rambo in detail here. And we're going to bring out some things, try to draw what we can out of this thing about an iconic action hero from the 80s and what he really was supposed to be, which is in the first movie. That's what he's supposed to be. But after the first movie, it pretty much becomes an all new original character. And we definitely going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about probably the James Bond. I finished all of the Roger Moore, the James Bond movies from what was it? Uh, I forget what the first one was, but the last one was A View to the Kill, A View to a Kill rather, and the exactly how the movies changed. The the James Bond films, they changed quite a bit after the 70s, especially going into the 80s. They changed a lot, and I didn't necessarily like the changes. Um, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that after Rambo. And it's not on the description, but I also want to talk about this new anime that I'm watching called Inuyashiki, which is um, it's tremendous. For the first time, I'm legitimately sort of frightened at an antagonist, and it's I've only got to watch the first 2 episodes, so I'm not all the way in. But man, well, I watched the first 3 episodes. It's a frightening experience, and it was cool. It's going to be very cool to talk about. And I'm kind of dabbling back into the anime thing. I gave us a couple of weeks off on the anime, talk about action movies. I'm pretty sure next week we're going to do our digging in to Kick Ass. I know we did 300 this month. I think we did Afro Samurai last month. Next week, the Kick Ass should be ready. I should have sat down and watched the Kick Ass movies. I finished the comic book series. I'm going to try to find some interviews from Mark Miller or John Romita Jr., the author and artist of Kick Ass. And we're probably going to do Kick Ass next week. And then we probably go back into maybe a little bit of anime because by then, Yashiki, I should have watched it all. And then perhaps we'll talk about something else. Maybe we'll go back into the action movie thing. But Sylvester Stallone uh, basically took Rambo from the creator in order to create a whole new franchise. And typically speaking, before we really get into Rambo, typically speaking, I don't like that. I think that if you're adapting somebody else's work, you should tell the story that they wanted to tell. Now, Sylvester Stallone had a good reason why he changed it. It wasn't just his ego, but he changed it for a sort of philosophical reason. And it was a little bit of political, but it was a lot of it was philosophical. He had a very philosophical difference with the creator. And typically I side with the creator, so I'm not always going to be like the Hollywood takes something that they didn't create and change it into something different. Most of the time, about 80 to 90% of the time, I'm going to say that probably wasn't a smart thing, and you should adapt the work the way that the author intended. But on this one, I'm going to give, because Rambo became so iconic, especially with the second movie, I'm going to give Sylvester Stallone a little bit of bail on this one. I'm going to think he made the right call, because if he hadn't made the call that he made, Sylvester Stallone would only be known for Rocky, and that was it. But instead, he made the executive decision to save John Rambo, and now we got the character, which is almost completely taken away from the author and is in no way what the author intended for him to be. At the same time, though, Rambo became what he was set up in the first movie to be. All right, so let's talk about Rambo First Blood, or as it's known in theaters, uh, First Blood, 1982, Sylvester Stallone. So, uh, Rambo, when we're introduced to him, he's kind of a vagabond. He's kind of a vagrant. Um, he comes to a small town. He's looking for a friend. He comes across like he's homeless. Like I don't want to put that stigma on him, but he does come across like he's homeless in this movie, at least at first. He doesn't really have anywhere to go, and he's going to see an old war buddy. Find out the old war buddy is dead, and that's depressing to him. That's hurtful. So he's trying to walk, and he's going to go to this small town, and he starts getting harassed by these police officers. And this is the central conflict of the movie: is Rambo hadn't actually done anything. He didn't actually do anything. He's just sort of a traveling guy who's carrying a bunch of stuff with him, because apparently he was going to go live with this friend. And, you know, that didn't turn out the way that he wanted it. And now he's just floating from place to place. The bully police officers basically tell him he's got to get out of town. They don't want his kind around here, without him even having a kind. You know, like they just don't like the look of him. The cops just don't like the look of him. And what you get is he's told, "Hey, I'm gonna give you a ride out of town." The guy, takes him right to the outskirts of town and leaves him. Rambo, because he's rebellious, because he figured he could do whatever he want, he turns around and walks back to the town. Immediately gets arrested. He gets arrested for, I think they said, vagrancy. And after he's patted down, they find out he has this gigantic knife. So now he's got a deadly weapon. So it just starts to snowball from there. He's got this weapon. These cops are all, they're not very nice. They're assholes. They're pushing him around. They're trying to force him to fingerprint him and all this kind of stuff. He's not really going with it. At a certain part of the story, he starts having these PTSD flashbacks. You realize that he was a POW at one point. So he sees the bars of the jail for the first time, and it makes him think of when he was arrested, when he was captured in Vietnam. And the Vietnam point is very important to the story. And they try to shave him because he's going to be in front of the judge, and they want him to look his best, so they're going to shave him. And so the cops are bullying him, and they're holding him, and he's got this razor, and he's going to shave Rambo. He's telling them not to move. But Rambo is having a PTSD flashback of when he got cut, as this time that he was captured. So he freaks out. He starts beating up the cops, and it turns into unrealistic superhuman pretty quickly. He beats the tar out of almost all of the police. He escapes, steals a motorcycle. He's off into the woods. Now the cops decide to waste tons of resources on chasing this guy through the woods, and that becomes the rest of the movie. It's a gigantic chase. It becomes almost like Waco or Ruby Ridge or something like that, where this guy is holed up in the woods, and he just wants to be left alone. and the police are like, nope, we're gonna send helicopters, we're gonna send SWAT teams, we're gonna do whatever we can to get you out of these woods. And this manhunt, which is it just keeps escalating. Like this stuff just keeps it keeps escalating. As he resists the state on this joint, it keeps escalating. The more he resists, even though he's not killing them, like he's showing an incredible amount of restraint in this movie. And you get, I think his name is Troutman, the general, who was Rambo's commander or whatever. This guy is he's trying to tell these police officers, like, I'm surprised you guys are even alive. Like, he's a Green Beret. He's a bad motherfucker out there in the woods. He's a dangerous man. They're not understanding that he is showing a great deal of restraint to these police officers. He's not trying to kill them. He's not trying to hurt them. He doesn't want to be a part of whatever they got going on. He just passing through. That's all it was. He gets his hands on some weapons. He's trying to scare them away, shooting at them and stuff like that. He's trying his best not to hurt these guys. They refuse to stop. Eventually, he's chased back into town. He gets into, I think it's back into the police station where he's got like all these weapons and everything. And he's finally confronted at the end of the movie by his commander. And they have this conversation where Rambo starts talking about the protests in Vietnam and how the war wasn't his war, and that in his mind the war is never over. And he said we could have won, they wouldn't let us win. He talks about in the service there was brotherhood, there was respect, there was a code of honor. He had responsibility. He was in control of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of machines. Now here he can't even get a job. It was an amazing scene where he breaks down and starts weeping. He legitimately just starts to cry. And you see, like, this guy has been through a lot. Now, in just watching the movie, just watching him, taking it all in, you see that the government essentially created a monster and then released that monster back into the world, which is pretty typical. So you get this Rambo story is much like a samurai with no master. It's like a Ronin story. In these old Ronin stories, typically the master dies or something like that, and then you have the soldier is left, the samurai is left to wander the earth looking for purpose. And you see that with Rambo, like he's left to wander the earth looking for purpose, but what he's really looking for is a connection. And Sylvester Stallone talks a lot about this in the articles we'll get to, but it's pretty clear in the first movie, without even reading any articles, that what Rambo wanted was in the first scene. He wanted to talk to and connect with people who understood him, who had been in the situation that he was in, and could help him readjust to the world as it is now. He had some bitterness in him from the protests, the bitterness of how people treated him. And if you know the real world response to the Vietnam veterans, and a lot of them did come back screwed up, that came from a very real place. And Sylvester Stallone and other interviews said that he wanted to rip from the headlines a little bit. And he liked to put Rambo in these situations where they're kind of ripped from the headlines. And how, Vietnam veterans were treated is always an important headline. There's stories of Vietnam veterans being spit on when they came back. If you remember the movie Dead Presidents, which was also about Vietnam veterans, at the end of the movie, when they're sentenced to prison, the judge just says, like, I was also a veteran. World War II, a real war, a real war that they actually won. So you get a lot of this. And Rambo was such a cultural icon. Like this whole First Blood movie, you could take bits and pieces of it and realize that so many other things spun out of this. For instance, the entire idea of Rambo kind of gives us the Punisher. You know, there's elements. I don't. What's the name of the character? Uh, Nuke from Daredevil. He has this our boys. We have to save our boys. The POW mindset. He takes these pills to make himself a super soldier or whatever. And that idea seemingly comes from Rambo because he often appears with no shirt and is a veteran who is kind of psychotic and all this kind of stuff. So you start getting all of these characters that comes into comic books and movies or whatever that share similarities to Rambo. Rambo, of course, uh, it's not a war movie like Full Metal Jacket. Like, it's not that, but it has elements of that because Full Metal Jacket had a lot of people with mental problems in the military and stuff like that. So this movie set the stage for the rest of the movies, but he's a very different character in this movie. He shows a lot of restraint in dealing with the police officers and dealing with his superior commander and dealing with the people. He's not a murder machine. He's not that guy in this movie, but he had the potential to be, which is what Troutman kept telling him. Like, look, you don't know what you're messing with out there. Like, this is a bad dude. This is the best we got out here. But he's a guy who's just looking for a connection. He just wants something out of life. And you're talking about a guy who comes back and he's kind of unsocialized. And that's why it was important. And when, and we'll talk about this a lot more in a minute, when he's discussed by Sylvester Stallone as being an animal. He's very instinctual, very reactive. And if you look at the first movie, you see exactly that. He's stoic. He doesn't show too much in the way of emotions. He's quote unquote silently resisting the police. He's just making them work for it. You want to fingerprint me, you're going to have to work a little harder. He's not openly attacking them or anything like that until he feels threatened. And he doesn't really feel threatened until he sees that razor coming at him. And now he's like, no way. And he shows you who and what he really is. So the first movie really kind of gives you a general idea about the culture around Vietnam veterans, how they were treated, how they react to the way that they're being treated, because these are dangerous men, They're highly trained weapons, essentially. And when you become a soldier, you do essentially become a weapon. And they're being mishandled. The society doesn't really care about them. And this becomes a recurring thing because in First Blood 2, at the very end of the movie, after he kills, 700 people or whatever, Troutman asks him, like, what do you want? And he says, I want what they want, the POWs that he saved in that movie, because that movie is pretty simple. John Rambo was let out of prison to go save some POWs, and Troutman gives them they set it all up. John Rambo was supposed to go into, I think it's Vietnam, get the Vietnam veterans out, but he's not supposed to engage with the enemy. But, there's some foul play on the American side, and he's kind of left stranded there, and he's left with no choice but to kill and kill and kill and kill. He's also heartbroken in that movie. He meets, a female, and she gets murdered. So that becomes a recurring theme in the Rambo franchise, is when he finally does have something, it's destroyed or snatched away from him. It's another thing that you see in the Punisher comic books too, is every time the Punisher either has an ally or a love interest, either they're killed or they leave him. It's just impossible to maintain those connections that he has. And that is the source of his rage, the source of his anger, is that he wants to have what everybody else has. He wants to have that normal life that other people have, but he's not allowed to have it. And part of it is the way society sees him. Part of it is his inability to connect with people who haven't had his same experiences. So it's an interesting story, but it says a lot about men and about how men adapt and about how men build brotherhood and how they build spaces. I hate to use that word because makes me sound like we're in a gender class or something like that, but it's very important. This is why fraternities and things like that became important. You you bond going through similar experiences, and in fraternities usually it's hazing or something like that. Everybody has to do 1,000 push-ups. You learn something about each other. You learn each other's strengths and weaknesses when you have to run 200 laps or some nonsense like that. And you have to find a way to meet at 10 o'clock at night. You got to coordinate schedules and all this kind of stuff. Nobody's going to die, of course. At least you don't. At least you hope not. But you have similar experiences. You share an experience. And those shared experiences bring you closer together. And that's what creates what Rambo is looking for. He's looking to share experiences with people, but he can't. How many people really know about him and know his situation or what he had to do or what he went through? He's deeply misunderstood. He's very deeply misunderstood. And he's not very well kept because he's not a fashion model. I want to talk about the metrosexuality thing so badly, but I'm just not going to do it here. We'll wait a couple of weeks to do that. But he is a violent man with violent tendencies, but the violence it's purposeful. He's not a rabid dog, He has to be pushed to that point. And even in this movie, you see that he's pushed to that point and he kind of still is able to keep it under control. Uh, Hideo Kojima was inspired by Rambo. I guess he's the creator of Metal Gear. So that makes sense because Solid Snake in Metal Gear wears the bandana similar to Rambo. Rambo it became such a huge cultural icon. And I'm not surprised because it came at just the right time. Vietnam was in the 70s or something like that. So you had a lot of Vietnam veterans in 1982. Like, oh my God, this is absolutely how we feel. It's absolutely very close to us. It spoke to us. But the creator, he didn't like it. Oh, Ali Hankerson, I've seen No Country for Old Men, but I haven't seen it in a long time. I'll have to watch it again. As far as I know, it's a movie about missing money, and Anton Chigurh chasing down people to get this money, and he's blowing holes in folks. In order to like really sit down and talk about the character analysis and everything, I would have to actually watch it again. So give me some time, and I'll go through it again. All right, so let's talk about the original creator of Rambo and what he thought of the first movie. And I can tell you, it's not good. But for one of the few times I'll say that I actually disagree with the creator. So this is from 2019. It says Rambo creator hates Last Blood, left theater feeling degraded and dehumanized. David Morrell is a best-selling thriller author whose debut novel, 1972's First Blood, was adapted into a 1982 movie of the same name. In First Blood, Rambo, he has no first name in the novel. A Vietnam War veteran is harassed by Kentucky police and suffers flashbacks to his time as a prisoner of war while imprisoned. When the police attempt to cut his hair, he breaks free of the police station, setting in motion a bloodbath as the police and National Guard hunt him down. Morrell had some involvement with the newest movie, the fifth in the series. Conversing with Stallone by telephone during the writing process, Morrell's hope for Last Blood was to portray a soulful Rambo, which included portraying Rambo tracking down a missing child, defending a family he never had. It says, but the communication between the author and Stallone soon ended. Stallone finished the script with Matthew Cyrillic, or whatever, a version of the plot point made into Rambo Last Blood, which shows Rambo journeying to Mexico to rescue a friend's granddaughter. Morrell says, I hated the film. He said agreeing with the overwhelmingly negative critical consensus to Rambo Last Blood. He says the film is a mess, embarrassed to have my name associated with it. Now, a lot of when it comes to Rambo, uh, the last movie was panned as being racist because this was 2019, right? 2019, pretty much, Rambo was fighting Mexicans. No way, that's racist. That's just totally racist. Um, then he says that, of course, he feels degraded and humanized. Instead of being soulful, this new movie lacks one. I felt I was less a human being for having seen it, and today that's an unfortunate message. Uh, um, he says that any glimmer of intelligence and substance left standing in the decaying saga. So he's very upset about this movie. He's upset about the last Rambo movie, but he was upset about the first one too, if we're being honest. Um, he said that film is a typical ultraviolet 1970s exploitation grindhouse film. The technique of Rambo Last Blood resembles. The sets here look cheap. The direction is awkward. He says the characters are thin as post-it notes. He says Rambo could be called John Smith and the film wouldn't change. It assumes the audience is familiar with Rambo's background, whereas anyone under 40 will wonder what on earth is going on within those tunnels. Well, look, Rambo, at this point, in 2019, there is not a child born that's over the age of 15 that doesn't know what Rambo is and what Rambo is about. Rambo is our modern Conan the Barbarian, right? He is our uh, our new mythological hero. All right, there's no way you don't know who Rambo is. There's no way you don't know. Now they may not know the story of Rambo. For instance, there's been a lot of Rambo movies that have come out over the course of 30 or 40 years, but there's no way you're gonna know, like, that Rambo is a very dangerous guy, and that everybody's seen the picture of young Sly with no shirt, carrying an M16, shooting randomly at anything that breathes. He's killing everything except the pigeons. All right, everybody knows that at this point. But the creator has long been upset about the direction of the Rambo franchise, and he's still cashing the checks, of course, but he's not uh, very happy about doing so. Because these movies, they're important, but it's the most important thing he's ever done. And usually I'm on the side of the creator. Usually I'm on the side of the creator, the guy who wrote the piece. It's like, look, if that's not what he wanted it to be, I get why you would be against that. The but at the same time, it became something so, I guess you could say, powering. Um, it was incredible, and he even created, a novel version of Rambo for the Second Blood movie. I mean, Rambo First Blood 2. He wrote a novel based on that one and a third. So even though he disagreed with Rambo surviving in these movies, because Rambo was supposed to commit suicide in the first movie. That's how the first movie actually ends. It ends just like the book. Rambo commits suicide. But Sylvester Stallone stepped in and looked at this and said, no way, we're not doing that. And I got to give him a lot of credit for it, you know. And I really liked how he explained it. This was in, I forget what article this is, but Sylvester Stallone said, quote, there are a lot of veterans who are going to look at this and go, so my only hope is to kill myself. He said, I can't do that. I did 20 interviews with veterans and I compiled it into that moment. All stream of consciousness with everything just pouring out. I want people to take away some sense of hope when they leave the theater. I don't want my heroes to die. Like, wow. Just think about that. You know, he saw Rambo as being a hero, and he didn't want the hero to die. You know, because if you look at the story, Rambo isn't doing anything wrong, really. He's being harassed by the police, and everything he's doing is a reaction to, the police forcing themselves upon him. Now, it's really scary, you know, that the guy almost got his way, and they actually did end up shooting a version of First Blood where Rambo does kill himself at the end, and ended up getting scrapped. So excellent call for Sylvester Stallone. Now, because Rambo became a cultural icon, even though he was written by a Canadian, which is incredible, that should tell you what authors used to be good at. Is It became a deeply American thing. He became Americana. And of course, that became, the political stuff came with that. The political stuff really started almost immediately with Rambo, after the first movie, of course. And it was similar to James Bond, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, where pretty much everything that the character stands for, everything the character is, was hated by certain segments of society, basically leftists. And part of it is because Rambo is, he's going to Vietnam, shooting up the Vietnamese, or he's going to Mexico, killing Mexicans, or he's going to Burma, killing the Burmese, or whatever. And I wanted to discuss a little bit more about how Sylvester Stallone sees Rambo, and it's interesting because he's the guy who's playing Rambo. Like he's the guy who has to get into this character. They have to get into this character's head and sort of figure out what makes the character tick. And he has to do so in a way that actually makes the author interested. But of course, the author, ended up not being all that interested. So Sylvester Stallone says in a McLean's article, he says, Rambo is me before coffee in the morning. Rocky is me after coffee. Rambo has reverted into kind of an id, primitive, reactive, instinctual, almost like an animal. I love this character because he isn't quite fleshed out. He's like an errant knight, looking to die in a glorious fashion. He has no desire to go into old age or have a family. Rocky is the antithesis. He cannot live without his family. So you've got the American Frankenstein monster, then you have the American dream. In the book, Rambo gets killed. I thought it was not the proper message. There had been close to 200,000 suicides by returning Vietnam vets. I said, why don't we take him right to the edge without annihilating him? And then Quentin Tarantino says, you're a coward. You should have killed him. So obviously Quentin Tarantino doesn't know that much about anything. But think about what he said here about Rambo. That Rambo is instinctual. He's American's Frankenstein monster. And of course, when you have soldiers, they have to be what you want them to be. They have to be men that are very, very comfortable with violence. They have to be comfortable with violence. And sometimes in our modern world, people are scared of violence. I talked about this last week. Now, I should have brought this up last week, but I didn't. So I want to read a little bit of Jack Donovan. Jack Donovan is sort of a cultural commentary kind of guy. He does a lot in the man's sphere. He's not talked about a lot, believe it or not, despite the fact that he's pretty prolific. And I think it has a lot to do with him being gay. I think people don't really want to read Jack Donovan, especially if they find out he's gay. But I feel like there are some things that he says that I think are incredibly important. So here's what Jack Donovan says about violence. It's from the article called Violence is Golden. He says, a lot of people think that they are nonviolent. Generally, people claim to abhor the use of violence, and violence is viewed negatively by most folks. Many fail to differentiate between just and unjust violence. Some, especially vain, self righteous types, like to think they have risen above the nasty, violent cultures of their ancestors. They say that, quote, violence isn't the answer. They say that, quote, violence doesn't solve anything. They're wrong. Every one of them relies on violence every single day. On election day, people from all walks of life line up to cast their ballots. And by doing so, they hope to influence who gets to wield the axe of authority. Those who want to end violence, as if they were possible or even desirable, often seek to disarm their fellow citizens. This does not actually end violence. It merely gives the state mob a monopoly on violence. This makes you, quote, safer, so long as you don't piss off the boss. All governments, left, right, or other, are by their very nature coercive. They have to be. Order demands violence. A rule not ultimately backed by the threat of violence is merely a suggestion. States rely on laws enforced by men ready to do violence against lawbreakers. Every tax, every code, and every licensing requirement demands an escalating progression of penalties that, in the end, must result in the forcible seizure of property or imprisonment by armed men prepared to do violence in the event of resistance or noncompliance. Every time a soccer mom stands up and demands harsher penalties for drunk driving, or selling cigarettes to minors, or owning a pit bull, or not recycling, she is petitioning the state to use force to impose her will. She is no longer asking nicely. The viability of every family law, gun law, zoning law, traffic law, immigration law, import law, export law, and financial regulation depends on both the willingness and wherewithal of the group to exact order by force. In other words, a lot of people who seem to hate Rambo because he's all about guns and shooting, well, that's the obvious form of violence, right? They don't really pay attention to how they want to enact violence. And I looked at this and I said to myself, like, man, this guy, not only is this guy pretty smart, because this is where I kind of get the idea that you need to be a little bit more comfortable with violence, and that it's a thing that you just have to live with in this world. But it's something that a character like Rambo is comfortable with. He doesn't necessarily like it, doesn't necessarily love it, even though sometimes it comes across like he does. But it's a thing that exists in the world, and some people are better at it than others. And when you train people in wars to be violent weapons, they stay that way. It's not like they can turn it off. Some people just can't turn it off. Sylvester Stallone in a 2019 article says that Rambo is the warrior that can never find peace. And this was also about Rambo Last Blood. He says he's always getting hurt, but now he's getting older. So he's talking about Last Blood. So he's getting hurt even more. And he's talking about, he says, right now, he says, a lot of guys go over to China to do action movies, but I think you could do more than that, do more suspense, more of a story. I think I found the right combination. It's more like Blade Runner because you're dealing with the two mixed culture at the same time. I don't want to tip it off, but it's fucking cool. And he's talking about reviving Rambo. He says he came home, but he never arrived. That's an important piece. He says, I went and there's a movie there, The Warrior That Can Never Find Peace. He just can't. His entire mind has been remolded, resculpted, and retooled in that adrenalized, horrible alternative universe called war. It's not PTSD, but a hunger. And I said, boy, now if we could hook him up with a motive so that it's not violence for violence sake. So he's become an adoptive father to this Latino growing family. And she's the only anchor he has left that touches his heart because everything else he's touched has died. And if that's jeopardized, well, everyone in the audience knows what he's capable of. You don't have to do this whole backstory. It's like, oh shit. So all the Rambo movies are essentially this way. Everything has a formula. James Bond has a formula. Spider-Man has a formula. Rambo has a formula. Rambo wants to be left alone. He's off doing something, not really being particularly intrigued with the world. He's not really interested in the world. We'll talk about that in a minute too when we start talking about the politics, quote unquote, of Rambo, as if Rambo had politics. But everything has sort of politics today. Uh, but when you look at this kind of thing, what you're seeing is that Rambo is a guy he's triggered. He's searching for connections, and he keeps finding that in dealing with these connections, opportunities for violence appear. And since he's comfortable with violence, more comfortable than most people, and since has been created to be an agent of order being what governments are supposed to do. They're supposed to go in and create order from chaos. That's when Sylvester Stallone says he's an errant knight, or when he's a samurai. All these men have codes of honor. People who have a code of honor, they things mean something to them. They have a moral backing to everything that they do. They want to maintain that stuff. So when there's a threat to it, they react to that threat, and they react to that threat more so than most others. So Rambo has become sort of the weapon that is, pointed at various degrees of disorder, and then turns around and destroys it. And I genuinely think that is very interesting, because why the hell wouldn't it be? Isn't that what we all want to do anyway? Somebody absolutely tries to ruin your life, and you're like, no, I'm not going to let it happen. Of course, it's going to be a little bit more dramatized because it's a movie. But how can you say that the motives that are not close to Rambo's heart wouldn't be close to the heart of a regular man? Like him searching for connection. That's a lot of people. And to be quite honest, if you look at, and I've done plenty of research on deviant behavior, when you look at something like what Rambo was going through in the first movie, you find that people with no connection to reality, especially males with no connection to reality, can be very destructive. In fact, that's when they're most destructive. Boys need to be socialized more than girls do, because misbehavior by boys can be very, very destructive. Almost every school shooter is male, and you find out that they don't have any friends. They're constantly bullied. They have no connections to the broader society. They don't play football. You don't see the star quarterback of the football team shooting up the high school. It doesn't happen, because he's got friends. He's got people who like him. He's got something to connect with that society that he wants to protect it, or at least he wants to preserve it. It's always the outcast, the guy who's got nothing, who is saying, fuck it, I'll destroy it all. I'll burn it to the ground. Why not? What's in it? What's in your society for me? And that sort of mentality goes not just for school shooters, but also for drug dealers. Guys who slang dope, guys who break into grandma's house, who steal, who join gangs. Hell, joining a gang is in some way an opportunity to socialize, an opportunity to make friends, to have somebody appreciate you. So you can go out and do some crazy stuff like steal a car, and you'll get rewarded for it. Either you'll get financially paid for it, or you'll get a pat on the back from the OG saying, oh, you solid. You one of us. Come get this tattoo on your face, or get this tattoo on your arm. Boys definitely need better socialization than girls. This is why almost all societies control male behavior and female behavior. Female behavior because of reproduction. Boys behavior because of aggression. All right, a frustrated boy with no ties to the society that he lives in will destroy the whole damn thing. And it don't take that many. One or two of them, and that's usually enough to run amok. So it's always better. That's why always push your sons towards sports or something that they can build a connection. Put them in a club or something. This is why the destruction of things like fraternities is a big problem, which has been going on college campuses for a while now. They've been trying to destroy fraternities anything that keeps boys socialized and together and holds up positive role models and positive experiences and gives kids good feedback for positive behavior. Because in a fraternity, you'll get positive feedback for being a good student, for being a good brother, calling and checking on people, showing respect, showing deference, as they call it. That stuff comes with a positive feedback loop, as opposed to joining a gang where you get a negative positive feedback loop. I know that sounds kind of unorthodox, but that's what happens. In a gang, you go out and you steal a car. You go out and you break into somebody's grandma's house, you steal some jewelry or whatever. Again, they'll pat you on the back. Therefore, you'll go do it again. In a fraternity, you do the right thing. You help some people out. You'll get that positive good brother, those good brother points. Maybe they'll hook you up with a job later or something like that. Or maybe you just, stay within the sphere of influence, especially if one of your brothers goes off to become something important. You may, be within that sphere of influence. This is why people join like Masonic organizations and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying people should become Masons. Let's chill on that. But what I'm saying is there needs to be positive male bonding spaces so you don't have these Rambos and these school shooters and all these kinds of people out there. You still need the warriors. You still need people who are willing to fight for your society. Just like you need men to be able to fight for their own families and for their own children and everything. But you don't want people to have hair triggers where these things don't matter to them. It needs to matter. It needs to be something that they're willing to protect, that they're willing to fight for. But they have to still be able to keep their wits about them. So once you realize that crime is deviant behavior, and that deviant behavior comes from a lack of connection, people typically, unless they're on drugs, they typically don't criminalize against people that they know. So when I had friends who would do that kind of stuff, they would go out to Dearborn or they would go out to Hamtramck and they would do it because they knew a lot of people in the city. They wouldn't break into houses on their own neighborhood. They would go somewhere else. They go get in a car, drive aways. Had a friend who used to do armed robberies. He went to Dearborn to do his armed robberies. He's black, light skinned, but black. He don't know any Arabs. He don't have any Arab friends. Let's put it like that. So he would go out to Dearborn and rob people. Get that positive feedback loop. He had a friend with him. They score a couple of. This is back when people used to carry cash. So this is several years ago. And he ended up getting shot. He survived. He got shot in the elbow. But you fall into those traps because you don't have positive male role models. No father, no older brothers. All of your peers are either they're coming and going. He's at that age where, his best friend is into girls and, he's into girls too, but he doesn't have one right now. And if his friend who is, a positive influence is not around, he has negative friends that are around, and they're saying, hey, let's go out and make a couple of quick bucks. Either you want to, sell some dope, or you want to stick this BB gun in somebody's face, or what you want to do. And he started doing that because it was easy money. But it was just not just that, but it was also for the power, get people scared of you. For some reason, boys like that kind of thing. They like the idea of somebody being scared of them, being intimidating. It gives them a rush, gives them that adrenaline. Ended up going bad for him. He spent like 3 years in jail after he got shot. Because him getting shot, he ain't go nowhere after that. But that's what ends up happening is you realize that without a connection to your society, without a connection, boys will go apeshit. They will absolutely go apeshit. So all of the Sigma male kind of mentalities and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of dangerous. Man is not meant to be an island by himself. He's meant to have other people with him. No matter how based a guy is, unless he's got a friend, a girlfriend, parents, or somebody, a church that he can go to. Boys don't go to church anymore. Girls go to church more than boys do now. You know, I talk about this book Bowling Alone a lot because it's a seminal work when it comes to talking about how our society has degraded over time in terms of us not having any social clubs. It used to be Lions clubs and all that kind of stuff. We don't have that stuff anymore. Now it exists, but it's very on a very small scale. Back in the day, there used to be bowling leagues. There used to be all kinds of stuff for young men and older men. They could come together, do something productive. You can network or just hang out, and you had a group of friends. Now you're living in a society where you see on Twitter or you see on TV every day, boys don't have any friends. They don't have any girlfriends. They're not having any sex. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting around all day playing video games. And what ends up happening? You see more out of control violence. They're going around punching people for no reason. They're pushing people onto the train in front of the train for no reason. You know, mental health problems. They're doing drugs and all this kind of stuff because they don't have something that is a central plot element in Rambo. Now, sure, they're not Vietnam veterans, but there's something about that masculine need for connection. And sometimes they're not sure how to build those connections. That's what, the older males are all about. That's what you need grandpa and dad to teach you how to talk to girls. How to you need sports, you need coaches to teach you how to deal with things like losing, not being as good as somebody else at something. How else are you going to figure it out? You're going to figure it out on your own? So many people have failed trying to figure that stuff out on their own. But ultimately, that's sort of the end game there. And Jack Donovan talks a lot about that, too, about finding your tribe. And I think another reason why people don't talk about Jack Donovan a lot, not just because he's gay, but I also think it's because I'm not going to say he's racist, but some of he writes specifically for white people, which makes sense because he is white. All right. But, he's talking about finding your tribe and staying within your tribe. That's a lot of racial language, like he kind of uses the old Viking thing because I forget like why he became like into the Viking stuff. I was reading quite a few of his books. I don't remember how he got into the Viking thing, but he became, obsessed with like Thor and Odin and all that kind of stuff because to him, that's his tribe. And, and he says like black dudes should stick to their tribe, build your communities, build your groups. That you need that support, but you also need to figure out what it means to be a man in your culture. What does it mean to be a man in your culture? What does it mean? What is the responsibilities that are put upon you as a man in your culture? Now you can break that down by race because, there are some racial differences in the United States and, it's a little different everywhere else. But there's, of course, the masculine universals as Americans. There are certain things that we require of our males. But then there are black men especially need to watch out for this. White men especially need to watch out for this, Hispanic males, Asians, etc. But ultimately, we're all on this mud ball together. So the men have to be responsible for. And war is when people who are responsible for certain things have an issue, right? Have a problem. Scott Adams really got into it the last couple of days because he's talking about separating, moving far away from black people. I know the context and everything. I'm not tripping on Scott Adams. I'll listen to part of his interview with Hotep Jesus and all that kind of stuff. I get him. I know what he was trying to do. I know what he was trying to say. I'm not mad at him. But I'm also not mad at him because I grew up listening to the Nation of Islam talk about separating from white people my whole damn life. Farrakhan and all these people they've been separatists forever. They've been separatists forever because their view of what a black male is supposed to do is not in a quote unquote American context. Even though it is American, Because it's not like pack your family up and move back to Kenya or something like that. Or no, it's nothing like that. But it's, you need to be stable. You need to be the head of the household. All this stuff applies to all men. But as the black man, you have to be the first line of defense against white people. And that's one of the first things you learn, when you start coming up into with the racial stuff. The white man is always after you for some odd reason. And that's why we talked about black exploitation movies. The man, quote unquote, is almost always the villain. The government and the white man, usually the same thing. You created to be the police. That's perfect. A security guard or whatever. It's almost always white people, white police or whatever. So it's different. Back in the past, you had the white man was taught the same thing. The black man is going to rape your women. You have to be the first line of defense against them. You have to protect your women from the black man. So this you get Emmett Till. You get these odds and ends, like these football players out here who they go to these colleges and they start hooking up with white girls, and then all of a sudden the white girl says she was raped, and now every white man on campus is like, get them kicked out, kick them out. The idea that they're both men that can suffer the same thing, that goes out of the window. They've had that drilled into their head that the black man is a rapist. Just like had it drilled into your head that the white man is always out to get you. And if there's not enough cinnamon in your cinnamon toast crunch, it's the white man's fault. So you have to understand what's going on in your tribe and what your tribe needs and requires of you. And Rambo is in a situation where he found out what his tribe, America, needed and was required of him to go to war, which, didn't turn out well for him. He got tortured and cut and everything. But now they're kind of rejecting him. They're rejecting what they made him. And that happens a lot too. And you'll see that often in gangster movies like New Jack City, where Nino Brown would, and other thug rappers and everything would blame society for how things didn't going too well for them. What Jeezy say? Hard to be drug free when Georgia Power won't give a nigga lights free. That's just a rationalization. I wouldn't sell dope, but my grandma needs power. It's like, okay, well, you didn't sell drugs, pay the light bill, and then went to work. No, you sold drugs, paid the light bill, then you went and bought a chain, you went and bought $300 shoes, then you went and spent $150 on some wet for some hoes. Come on, it's just if people were being honest, they would know that, But ultimately, you'd have to know what your society requires of you. And the Rambo story is one where we are required to have men take the ultimate sacrifice to go bond with other men and murder other people. And yes, bad things are going to happen. War is not pretty. War is not fun. But it's also a political thing because, of course, once he comes back, he's spit on. He's protested. He's called a baby killer. All this stuff. And when he has his breakdown at the end of the first movie, and he's talking about those leftoid protesters who hate, the Vietnam veterans. They hate the Afghani veterans and everything too. It became a political talking point because now the politicians are starting to pick it up. So now Rambo has become a sort of political thing, which makes no sense. And it's something that for years, Sylvester Stallone has been arguing against, has been fighting against. So we're going to talk about Rambo as a political piece now. Now, he's not for this, of course, but let's discuss it. There's a story, 2019 Esquire. Sylvester Stallone's Rambo has devolved into a hyperbolic symbol of right-wing politics. Rambo is a war machine that can't be turned off, Sylvester Stallone told Richard Zoglin in 1985. At the time, the multi-hyphenate action star was riding high on the success of First Blood 2. And then it started talking about they're catching up, what was going on in the first one. Then they requote David Morrell. Says that this new Rambo lacks a soul, and all this kind of stuff. So it says, quote, Rambo's post First Blood journey has steadily led him down darker and more regressive byways since 1985. In First Blood 2, he humped back to Vietnam to rescue American soldiers that were missing in action, and to kill a few dozen Viet Cong and Soviet baddies too. In Rambo 3, 1988, Stallone's fatigued anti-hero accepts a mission to rescue his sworn enemy, Colonel Troutman, from the Soviets in Afghanistan, and to also help the Mujahideen fighters win their independence. Then, in Rambo 2008, the big man guns down and rips through the throats out of bloodthirsty Burmese troops who have targeted a group of unarmed Christian missionaries, and also the coveted Karen people in Myanmar. With all these bodies and ghosts to his credit, one can't help but wonder, how the hell has Rambo survived this long? As the character transformed over the span of the movies, toy companies also raised objections. A Hasbro spokesperson said after the company lost their bid to license Rambo toys that, quote, Rambo is a character from an R-rated movie. Protest groups, Peggy Charon, president of Action for Children's Television, quote, the problem with Rambo as a doll is it's a doll for children, whereas the movie is not a children's movie. It's a movie for adults. And censors in England, the BBFC, took issue with the excessive blood splatter and glamorization of weapons. First Blood 2 spawned 3 more live-action sequels, a G.I. Joe-esque cartoon spinoff promoted with laughably inappropriate toys, like the Uzi, the grenade, and the knife, and some more adult-oriented tchotchkes like authentically verified bullet shells fired from guns used during the filming of Rambo 3. Over the years, Rambo has insisted that, quote, people don't change and that he, quote, just can't switch off his wartime training, as he said to Troutman in both First Blood Parts 2 and 3, and again in the flashbacks to Rambo. But now he's living on his family's Bowie, Arizona ranch, decades after he hid from his past in Thailand. And they're going to keep going on and on and on about this kind of stuff. So, of course, it's 2019. It's 2019, so it says, Last Blood's Mexican antagonists have led critics like Uproxx's Vince's Mancini to argue that, quote, Trump-era Rambo is essentially a human border wall keeping out Mexican rapists and murderers. That is not the context of this movie, by the way. As far as I remember of Rambo 2008, Rambo goes to Mexico. He's not like standing on the border, standing at the border and gunning down Mexicans. I mean, that's a complete misread of this movie, which shows that these people they claim that the right has no media training. They have no media training. It's ridiculous. So they talk about this stuff. About all of these characteristics of Rambo and how awful he is, and basically that he's a Republican. That's typically the idea, that because Rambo is about guns and killing, even though that's not really what the character is about, that these things have become horrible Republican talking points. And he spent years and years and years arguing against this stuff. I'm trying to find here's it is in Hollywood Reporter. Sylvester Stallone says, quote, like everyone assumed Rambo is a conservative. President Reagan posted a picture going, Rambo's a Republican. I went, uh-oh. Rambo is totally neutral. He doesn't even live in this country. He feels scorned by it. And my politics are, may the best man win. I've voted both sides, but I'm definitely in the middle. People assume I'm the same as my character, and I do talk to everybody. I think it's crazy not to. Actually, I avoid some people because it sends out the wrong message. You're asking yourself, do I really need this controversy? But the important piece that we're talking about here is Rambo is not a Republican. He doesn't even live in this country. He feels scorned by it. This is something that you learn in the first 2 movies. That he is not necessarily the quintessential American hero. Now, he's adopted by the right because they love soldiers. They support the troops as a right wing Bush era slogan, you know, but it was a slogan for Republicans even long before that. You know, they disagree with all of the people who were protesting the Vietnam War and all that kind of stuff. So everything that these people, the critiques of Rambo, a lot of it is about the violence, but also it's going to be about the support that he has gained from Republicans, which of course is turned into almost the exact same thing. And I think we talked about it a little bit with the Punisher, is how people have decided they're going to adopt the Punisher. So the Punisher all of a sudden became a right wing talking point, but that's not really the intention. Nobody is actually looking to make Rambo a right winger. It's just it's a weird it's a weird situation that we're dealing with here. But everybody makes everything political these days. You know, it's all politics now, and there's just no way to escape it. Even if you wanted to, you can't escape it. You know, so it's not entirely for the best. You know, and to me, it's scary how people basically can look at something. Now, I could be a bit of a dickhead if I wanted to, and I could say, all right, let's say you have an issue with something like Rambo. You know, Rambo, he's going to go save some POWs in Vietnam. That's the second movie, right? Should you not do that? How should you handle, enemies who have kidnapped, you know, well, technically they're prisoners of war. How should they be freed? What should we do? Should we negotiate? They sent in one man. And if you followed the movie, he wasn't supposed to engage with the villains at all. He wasn't supposed to do anything. He was supposed to just find out that their POWs are there, take pictures, and then come back. But then he got shafted and everything. How are you supposed to handle that situation? I would hate to be a POW with the left in control. They leave me sitting in there to get tortured and everything because hey, we can't fight. You know, so that wasn't the first time he's made that statement. There was another statement that he made. He says, "quote People assume, okay, you're a staunch Republican." He says, "I'm not. I'm just very pro those guys in the military, but by no means am I jingoistic full on Hannibal. When Ronald Reagan came out and said after seeing Rambo, I know what I want to do in Libya, I said, oh no, Rambo is neutral, but my character became the ultimate right wing machine." uh, yeah, kind of, but that wasn't by design. The character was adopted because what the character stands for, it meets what these people are looking for in a hero. A no nonsense living weapon that stands for the similar or same values as that they stand for. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can't say anything to these people. So Rambo is not a political statement. He's basically a soldier, and he's a he's kind of a man with no country because as a soldier he was rejected when he came back. He's been used and abused over and over and over again by this country. Now he basically kind of does things with when they're personal to him, not necessarily because as James Bond cares for, God and country or Queen and country. Not necessarily Rambo. They had divorced Rambo from the United States a long time ago. If you followed the character and followed, everything, you would know that. The first movie wasn't really about the United States at all. Rambo just wanted to find some kind of connection, wanted to, be with a guy who could appreciate the horrors that he went through. And in the second movie, he went to go save some guys who were a lot like him, lost in the Vietnamese jungle, left behind by the military. But he did not and does not, is not really a sanctioned weapon of the American government. He's not operating. Well, I guess he is operating as an agent of the state. I guess he's more of a mercenary, I guess you could say at that point then. Like, again, like a Ronin. You know, a Ronin is a mercenary. He has no master. He works for whoever has the highest coin. But in this instance, Rambo isn't doing it for the money. He's doing it in these situations because these situations are personal to him. You know, when you take a situation, they have to craft a story about him being close to this Latino family, or Troutman is kidnapped, or these are POWs, or whatever the case may be. He's trying to maintain family connections or whatever. That has nothing to do with the United States. It's not like, you know, Rambo's going to go shoot up Afghanistan because, well, Bush wants to send him to shoot up Afghanistan. Like, that's not the message. But again, you have to be familiar with his character. You have to be familiar with the psychology of this character. You have to be familiar. And you have to also be intellectually honest, which a lot of people are not. A lot of people are just not honest at all when discussing Rambo. You know, characters that like guns, that are shoot 'em up, bang bang characters. They can't stand them. You know, the idea that Rambo is like some kind of horrible right wing monster comes from the fact that he simply uses a gun. They've said this about pretty much every action star action movie that came out recently. What was it? The Bruce Willis movie. What was that? It was a remake of another movie. Death Wish. Oh, Death Wish. It was bloody and terrible. How awful it was. It glorified guns. It's like, again, these people, they claim they don't like violence. But hey, Jack, you heard what I wrote about Jack Donovan. You know what I'm saying here. They're very comfortable with violence. They're more comfortable with proxy violence though. And I'm 100% on board with what Jack Donovan says. So here's a little bit more of what he says, since we're talking about violence. It says, without action, words are just words. Without violence, laws are just words. Violence isn't the only answer, but it is certainly the final answer. One can make moral arguments and ethical arguments and appeals to reason, emotion, aesthetics, and compassion. People are certainly moved by these arguments, and when sufficiently persuaded, providing, of course, that they are not excessively inconvenienced, people often choose to moderate or change their behavior. However, the willful submission of many inevitably creates a vulnerability waiting to be exploited by any one person who shrugs off social and ethical norms. If every man lays down his arms and refuses to pick them up, the first man to pick them up can do whatever he wants. Peace can only be maintained without violence so long as everyone sticks to the bargain. And to maintain peace, every single person in every single successive generation, even after the long war is over, must continue to agree to remain peaceful forever and ever. No delinquent or upstart may ever ask, or else what? Because in a truly nonviolent society, the best available answer is, or else we won't think you're a nice, very nice person, and we're not going to share with you. Our troublemaker is free. I pushed a button and I lost. I lost my place. Um, let's see. He says, our troublemaker is free to reply, I don't care. I'll take what I want. Violence is the final answer to the question, or else what? Violence is the gold standard, the reserve that guarantees order. In actuality, it is better than a gold standard because violence has universal value. Violence transcends the quirks of philosophy, religion, technology, and culture. People say that music is a universal language, but a punch in the face hurts the same no matter what language you speak or what kind of music you prefer. So that's Rambo in a nutshell. Rambo is a man of order. He wants connections to his society, but he couldn't find them, so now he's finding them at a personal level. personal individuals here and there that he is friendly with, that he appreciates, who appreciates him, who understand him. And if you screw with those people, he's coming with the guns. That's the or else what. It's leave me alone or else. That's literally the plot of the first Rambo. Hey, I'm just walking through town. Cops, get out of here. And Rambo's like, I didn't do anything. And the or else what is, or else I'm going to arrest you. Okay, well, I'm going to resist arrest. Okay, then we're going to escalate. Okay, then I'm going to escalate. And then we're going to pull out this razor because we're going to shave you. And he's like, nope, nope, nope. And we're off to races from there. All right, eventually violence is coming. They've already been violent and trespassed against him by grabbing him and arresting him for no good reason. But he put up with it. But ultimately, order has to be maintained. In this situation, the cops usually represent order, but they were being disorderly. They were the ones pushing people around, being bullies and being dickheads or whatever. Now, that's, to me, a great way to showcase what Rambo is. He's the pushback when you've been pushed. You know, he's not a let's just go do stuff. You know, he definitely is an action-oriented character because he's not afraid to make the first move. But he is not necessarily um, out to do large amounts of damage for no damn good reason. Now, one last thing before we start talking about James Bond and I talk about Inuyashiki a little bit is we're going to talk about what Sylvester Stallone thinks of modern action movies. And I think this is very important because anytime I talk about an actor, I always care very much about what they think about modern action movies. I don't know why, but I care very much about it. So he said the same thing numerous times, but I want to read them anyway, because I think that it really kind of beats people over the head. Sylvester Stallone said, quote, "The action film is pretty much a thing of the past. The kind Arnold and I did, or Chuck Norris, which is self-generated. Today's action hero, his skills are through technology. He can fly, he can throw a bolt of lightning, he can freeze people. It's not like in the trench action. And I don't know if that's ever coming back. That's why Expendables worked. It was a walk down memory lane with 11 of the ugliest action dudes I've ever seen on one poster. It was a thug village." A thug village. So he talks about it in Variety. He says, earlier action films, Dirty Harry, even Bronson, it was slowed down. You could actually saw this guy thinking, and you could say, you know, I'm on board with this. I know that feeling. Whereas it's tough to get into Thor's head. I don't know what it's like to be that guy. So you're swept away by this magnificent display of technology. With Rambo, I'm looking at something much more simplified, like man on man in a cave. It's pretty simple, really basic, no CGI. And he starts talking about it in Variety. These films now are scientific. They're made by techno wizards. They don't have to interact with actors to the extent you're used to because the machines do the work. That's not to denigrate the actors. In a Marvel film, you're not going into the subtleties. You're dealing with a canvas so big, so huge that it becomes, to me, almost like watching a fireworks show. Like, wow, that was big. It's a whole different thing. And he basically says that again and again. He says it in a different article. He says, he was asked the question, even though obviously it seems like action films have shifted to that, superheroes and CGI, are there any younger action stars who've impressed you? He says, I think there are, but I like to take them out of that scenario and the CGI aspect of it. Because I know that they all want to do it. I can't tell you how many actors and comedians, even Adam Sandler, have said, I'd love to do Rambo. It's like it's every guy's fantasy to do that stuff. But it's something that's very hard to find, that kind of actor. You can find muscles and a good look and this and that, but that's not what it takes to be Charles Bronson. They're there, but it's not for everybody. So when you find someone like John Barenthal, you go, yeah, he's got the makings of it. So he's he talked about it again in Sharp magazine, where he was talking about hoping to make new action movies. He says a lot of these are harkening, talking about movies he would like to make. A lot of these are harkening back to when men were men, when action films were basically men overcoming incredible odds, but terra firma and real, not something that's CGI driven, almost like Rambo, Rocky, early Charles Bronson, Dirty Harry. That's the kind of film I'm focusing on. So you see over and over again that he's a guy who is making this statement that the action film has changed a lot over time. And the action film is now more about, technology and more CGI and superpowers and stuff like that. And that's not really what people are interested in. If you look at something like John Wick, there's a lot of camera uh, gimmicks and stuff like that. Like I saw the first John Wick. I don't think I saw the last two or three, however many there's been. I'll probably watch the first one. I really enjoyed Taken because I think Taken did a good job of, avoiding all of that stuff. Liam Neeson was pretty kick ass in Taken. But for the most part, we know that Marvel movies dominate, the theaters and stuff now. Superhero movies. Um, goddamn, uh, what's that? The J.K. Rowling stuff. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. Even though Lord of the Rings has a lot of sword fights and stuff like that in it, there's still magic in it. Like good old fashioned fisticuffs and, guys with knives, Predator and all that kind of stuff. Stuff's not really there. Now, he did get confronted about a comedy he made because, this is Hollywood. Hollywood Reporter posed this question. You once complained there doesn't seem to be enough real men to go around. That was in 1976. What's your take on the state of masculinity today? Amazing. They went back to 1976 to try to corner him. Had to be 43 years ago. I think this interview was in 2019 or something. Uh, he says, did I say that? He says, it's not that there aren't any real men. I meant that there are not enough roles for men to play that kind of outsider. The Steve McQueens, the Dirty Harrys, they're out of vogue. I think they will come back. I really do. You just change a few things. I don't know what I was thinking. The 70s were a very masculine time. My God, today's a masculine time too. You just got the toughest athletes in the world now. Very interesting choice of words. The toughest athletes in the world. He wasn't talking about the actors. We see the actors on the covers of magazines wearing thigh-high boots and lip gloss. So, they're not tough guys, that's for sure. But so Sylvester Stallone, yeah, he has a reputation for being a man's man. He's up there in age. I think Tulsa King might be the last time we see him really get busy. He talked a little bit about he wanted Tulsa King to be sort of the last, his swan song when it comes to acting, because he always wanted to play a gangster in a TV show, but he was waiting for the right kind of gangster role to come along, and he felt like he's able to finally craft that with Tulsa King. And I really liked Tulsa King, and he was very different in that. There were some people who complained that Tulsa King was woke, and that Sly has gone woke. That not necessarily true. There was some moments in there when he talked about racism or whatever, and he did sort of adopt a black character almost immediately upon coming into Tulsa. But it wasn't necessarily like lectures on feminism or anything like that in the TV show. It was straight up, gangster shit for the most part. And I really liked Tulsa King, so I hope everybody watched it. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so we got an hour and 25 minutes. We're going to talk about James Bond real quick. Let's be more specific. Let's talk about Roger Moore as James Bond. Because I watched all the Roger Moore movies, and I have to tell you, I did not like most of them because the formula started getting watered down. I think they changed a lot, um, in especially in the mid '80s. I definitely think things changed in the mid '80s. They became a lot more humorous. The women became a little bit more disrespectful. You know, like the slap a bitch Connery was kind of wow. Like that was a different time. That was the '60s and the early '70s. When he was batting women around. You know, in the early Roger Moore movies, he was sort of the same. He was kind of a strong James Bond figure, and he became a little bit sophomoric later. The movies became very comedic too. Like they became strangely comedic. Um, there was always that scene where the guy is like, "Oh, James," and he's peeking in on James. James trying to smash some chick. And it's like James doing weird stuff, like I think it was A View to a Kill, or was it Octopussy? It was one of the two, where he sees a camera. James Bond sees a camera. And the first thing he does is get behind the camera and zoom in on a woman's titties, and he just kind of goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like a teenage boy would do if he got uh, an opportunity to look down a woman's top. And I was like, man, that doesn't feel like James Bond to me. James Bond is a lot cooler than that. He's a lot more charming than that. And that just became what the movies were. You know, it seemed like at some points in certain parts of those movies, they were mocking the James Bond formula. Like I'm not saying that they were terrible movies, but you could honestly tell that they were slipping in some things into those movies that raised an eyebrow, like Roger Moore in A View to I think that was Octopussy, where he was wearing a clown suit, and you're like, like I know that's maybe I'm being conspiratorial, but I'm like, why is he dressed like a clown? Like I know that it was supposed to play off the beginning of the movie where the clown is killed and they had the Fabergé egg and all that kind of stuff. But I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't like the idea of, James Bond in clown makeup and wearing clown shoes and all this kind of stuff. Like that felt off to me. I didn't really like that too much. So I really wasn't feeling a lot of the James Bond movies, even though I loved A View to a Kill. Grace Jones, striking look, not much for an actress, but she made an impact as Mayday. Um, Christopher Walken was a very different Bond villain, and so much that he was far more hands on than most Bond villains. I think the only Bond villain that was probably a little bit more hands on than him up to that point had been Scaramanga and the Man with the Golden Gun, because he was, pretty much, actively going around killing people. But you had Christopher Walken just slaughtering people in the mines, just standing there. I was like, wait a minute. So now I looked it up because I was like, this is awkward. So I looked it up, and I found that Roger Moore didn't even like that because he felt like that wasn't James Bond. And I was like, it stands out for that reason. I think that all of Bond's villains are multi-billionaire businessmen who are megalomaniacs who want to destroy the earth or destroy the United States, or for either political reasons or financial reasons, one or the other. To have a guy who fits that archetype, because he's a businessman, I think his name is Zoran, and he's in a tunnel wearing a hard hat and a suit, and he's just gunning down miners. There's something visceral about that where you're like, hell yeah, like that's fucked up. I can't wait to see this guy get his ass kicked. But it also comes across as being something that is completely divorced from the rest of the James Bond villain archetype, who usually is a guy who did, as that James Bond doesn't really come into contact with much until near the end of the movie. Maybe they have a couple of conversations or whatever, but they're not as entrenched in the story. Usually they kill one person with some kind of contraption. They push a button and they get eaten by alligators or sharks or whatever, and in order to show how bad they are. But Christopher Walken was just like, all right, give me a gun, I'll just murder a bunch of people in a mine. Like, that's okay. I liked the departure because I liked A View to a Kill. I liked it more than the movies that came before it. and I felt like it was probably one of the better Roger Moore Bond movies. But I also felt like they were starting to take the piss out of Bond after a while. So I watched all of the Connery Bonds and all of the Roger Moore Bond movies. My favorite Bond movies are still the um, Diamonds Are Forever, Goldfinger, From Russia with Love. Those are still my three favorite. But A View to a Kill is probably my favorite Roger Moore one. Um, I was also very interested to find out that one of the big criticisms of A View to a Kill, when I was looking it up, is that people thought Roger Moore was too old to be playing James Bond at the time, which is something that you never hear about in Hollywood, that a man is too old to play a certain role. I think he was 57 when he was in James Bond, when he was James Bond in A View to a Kill. And I was like, wow, he really got criticized for being too old. And that's the first time I ever heard something like that. But I think Roger Moore was fine as Bond. He was okay. I think the movies that they built around him, specifically in the 80s, were not very good. They were coming out very close together, too. If I remember correctly, they were like 2 years apart, 3 years apart, or whatever. They also started doing bits and pieces of certain books that were taken apart and put in here, and taken apart and put in there, and that kind of stuff. Um, so I think that basically they did him a disservice, when it comes to how good he could have been as James Bond. Um, I also think they kind of stripped away Bond's charm, which is what Sean Connery was my favorite thing about him, is that he was very charming. And they added a more sophomoric humor aspect to it, where there's a lot of sexual innuendos in the Roger Moore Bond movies. Um, but that's where you started seeing, like, you could tell there was a formula in the Sean Connery Bond movies, but you could see it more clearly in the Roger Moore Bond movies. So I don't know. I didn't really care for him. Timothy Dalton only did two, so I'll probably watch both of those by Wednesday or something like that. I'm probably going to skip the Pierce Brosnan movies because I've seen all of those already, and I've seen all of the Daniel Craig's too. But I may watch them just for comparison. But I just really wanted to watch the older guys that I haven't seen before. I haven't watched any of these movies before. But I'm kind of disappointed in how these Bond movies have turned out with the Roger Moore Bond movies. He did 7 films, and out of all 7, I think his last one was probably the best one. But you know, it's hard to tell because it became so formulaic, and the franchise became so popular that you can tell that they was basically just coasting off of the popularity of the brand and not so much focusing on well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe because I'm looking at the list now, and maybe The Man with the Golden Gun. I kind of like that too. Live and Let Die was okay, but I like The Man with the Golden Gun. The duel with him and Scaramanga. I did like that. But I think everything after The Man with the Golden Gun kind of cringe. But I'm definitely gonna. I definitely think the last few movies were a little too comedic. So the '80s Bond movies, wasn't a big fan of those. The '60s and '70s Bond movies, I did kind of enjoy those. All right. Do you guys have anything you want to discuss before we call it a day here? All right, I'll give y'all guys a couple of seconds. Ooh, my mouth is dry. Where is I brought a bottle of water up here. All right, I'll put it up here. Shit. Okay. Before we go, I want to talk about Inuyashiki, the anime that I've started watching. It is it's an interesting anime because it turns a couple of things on its head. Now, it's not a shonen, so it doesn't flip like or subvert shonen in any way. It's a seinen, an adult. Um, so what it is so far I watched 3 episodes. You get this older guy. He's a bit of a loser. His name is Inuyashiki. He starts he's feeling sick. He's old, so he's feeling ill, and there's something wrong with him. So he starts doing things that he's always wanted to do. He builds a house to move his family into, even though they don't really appreciate it. They're just complaining about the house. It's too small. It's too dark. Why you want to do this now? All that kind of stuff. You know, his wife doesn't really appreciate him. Nobody really appreciates him. He's kind of an old put upon guy. He gets bullied on the train by younger people. He's not really appreciated at work. He finds a dog. The dog really likes him, but everybody hates the dog. The family don't want the dog, so he wants to keep the dog in his room. The dog shits on the floor. The wife, wants to throw the dog out, and he's really sad and put upon. And he's worried that if he even tell his family that he's ill, but and would they even care if he told them that? And so he hesitates to tell them that he's sick. And he instead goes out into the middle of nowhere and he starts crying with the dog. He's just weeping. Next thing you know, there's a young boy standing there. Then there's an explosion of light, and you can see, like, I guess that there's aliens or something, and they're experimenting, yada yada yada. And when he wakes up, he's feeling different. He's feeling a little bit different. He's perpetually thirsty, and he can hear voices from far away and all kinds of stuff. And we find out that he's been transformed into some kind of cyborg or a robot or something. And so now he has to sort of learn how to deal with that. That's kind of episode 1. He uses that to the cyborg robot abilities to become a hero, kind of build up his confidence in himself. So you get this guy who is sort of poor, put upon, loser in society, who now has to change, who is now going to change his perception of himself, utilizing this experiment that has become him. And in the second episode, we meet the villain. The villain is a teenage boy who underwent the sort of same situation. He was right there with Inuyashiki. His name is Hiro, Hir, Hiro. And Hiro is a sociopath. Like, all he really cares about is manga and this one guy that he's friends with. And he doesn't really care about human beings. And he starts utilizing his little robot cyborg powers to impress his friend. Like, he's shooting birds from the sky. He starts making cars crash into each other. He's doing horrible stuff. And his friend at first because his friend thinks it's a magic trick at first, because that's what he told him. It's magic. And as it becomes more and more deadly, the friend starts thinking that this stuff is funny. It's not funny anymore, Like, it becomes scary. Now, Hiro wants his friend to go to school because school is boring without him, which is an interesting thing. But Hiro thinks his friend's being bullied, and he says, "I'll kill the bully for you if you want me to." And Hiro and Choco, which is the name of his friend, is like, I'm not with that one." So as Choco tries to figure out what's going on, make sense of what his friend is becoming, Hiro is standing in the middle of the street. He kind of spins around in a circle, and whatever house he stops in front of, he just goes in and starts killing people. Like, he kills the mother while she's making dinner. He goes into the bathroom. He starts torturing the father who's in bath with the baby. Baby's like 1 or 2 years old or something like that. And he shoots the father. The father's body falls onto the child, and the child is trapped underneath. I'm telling you, that legit fucked my head up. If we sat there and just watched this like 1 or 2-year-old baby drown in blood, my head was fucked at that point. I was like, oh my God, why am I watching this shit right now? I was so full of hate and anger. And that's when I realized, like, yo, it's been a long time since an anime really grabbed me by the throat like that. Like, that really screwed with me, dog. Having that baby kick or whatever in the tub, I was like, bro, no way. And it just gets worse from there. So the daughter comes home. Hero is torturing the daughter, cut her hand open, asking her what her favorite manga is, what's her favorite manga characters, and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, she's crying and she won't stop crying. She won't stop being scared. He ends up killing her too. And then you get that the old man can hear it. He can hear her cries for help. And he goes to try to save her, but he gets stuck in traffic. It's the stupidest thing because you're like, this guy's, he's like a robot or a cyborg or something like that. He should be able to avoid traffic. But he's listening to this girl die in his ear while he's stuck behind a bus, like both hands on the wheel, stuck behind the bus. And you're like, that's torturous. It's torture that he's trying to get there to help this young lady because he can hear her. And she's dead. So when he finally gets to the house where she was, she's dead. The entire family is dead. And Hero is still there. You know, who knows what the hell he was doing there, but he was still there. And he thinks that the old man is the grandfather in the family, shoots him too. Finds out grandpa's still alive. And that's now that these two entities know that each other exist. This is how they meet. He's seen that Hero does horrible things to people, and he's trying to stop him. And then kind of separate because Hero knows a little bit more about his powers and his body and everything, so he kind of disappears. In episode 3, you finally get to see a little bit more of the older guy, Inuyashiki. He's trying to figure out what he can do. Okay, so for the first time, he's really stopped freaking out about being a robot, and now he's focused on what he can do. So he finds out that he can actually heal things. He found a cat that was dying. He found out that he can heal it. So now it's going to help his superheroism a little bit. And now that he feels like he knows that he can help people, he finds some courage. Even though he's a robot now, that doesn't mean he knows how to fight. So he's trying to help this other guy, and he's a pathetic fighter because he's an old man. But he continues to try, and he ends up beating up this gang of guys, almost completely by accident. So you really get to see how this guy is trying to become a hero, even though he was this poor, put upon elderly man. You see that he's actually trying. He wants to be a good guy. He wants to, and the first thing he thinks of and this is great hero shit. And I'm actually jealous, and I'm probably going to rewrite one of my stories to come up with this. But when he figured out he can heal people, the first thing he does is he goes to a hospital. He thinks of cancer patients. The first thing he thinks of is, oh shit, I can help people who have cancer. He goes to the hospital to do that. Meanwhile, Hero is out shooting people in the street, killing them in front of his friend, who is now frightened to death. And I love this. Also is a great character moment. Choco and Hero are on the bridge, and Choco tells him, "Look, I can't be friends with you anymore. You're killing people. You're stealing money. Like, he's found out since he's an android, or a robot or whatever, he can give himself like unlimited cash. So he goes and he steals a bunch of money from an ATM or whatever, like hundreds of trillions of dollars or something like that. And Choco's like, no, I'm not down for this. I'm not with this. And Hero's like, oh man, chill out. What's the big deal? And Choco asked him to turn himself in. Like, okay, you killed all these people, you stole all this money, turn yourself in and we'll be good. And Hero's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not turning myself in. Like, why would I do that? And from there, their friendship ends. Choco says, I can't be friends with you. You're horrible. And you get that Hero is bothered by it because that is his only friend. But at the same time, he very effortlessly walks away from this friendship and goes back to killing people. So I've only watched 3 episodes of it so far, but it's dramatic and it's really powerful. It's an anime called Inuyashiki. I don't know when it started. I just found out about it today, and I went and searched for it, and it's like 11 episodes up. I've only watched 3 so far, and it's uh it's mind blowing how brutal it is. You know, watching this kid just gun people down in the street, even though it's not a gun. He's using only his finger, but he has some kind of robot power where he can shoot, like, I'm guessing, like air bullets or whatever, and it's horrifying shit, you know. And it blew my fucking mind. So hopefully you guys can, if you guys are interested in watching it, I'll put it in the description. I'll put it right here, matter of fact, so you can look it up. Let's see, Inuyashiki. I misspelled it twice already. Inuyashiki. Booyah. There it is. All right. So I guess that's it. We're for the first time in a long time. I'm actually gonna get out of here before 10 o'clock. All right, you guys go watch Inuyashiki. Hope you guys will watch Rambo with a new uh, eye on the product after talking about it. Hopefully everybody has a good week. You know, I see you guys. I got a video up Monday. It's gonna be up Monday. I'm not gonna spoil it just because you guys just don't have to watch it. If you lost Trauma 333, I have to start the video over. I told you I was gonna, because you come in an hour and 45 minutes later. I honestly don't know what you're talking about at that point. But I got timestamps, but I didn't put the time what the timestamps were supposed to be for. So I have to do that some other time. But I appreciate everybody for coming through. Thank you guys for your time. Do all the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, everything like that. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.